I was 10 years old when Breath of the Wild released. I got my start with Ocarina of Time, and then moved on to the NES titles like Zelda 1 and Zelda 2. Soon after came Majora's Mask, then Skyward Sword, and so on and so forth. So by the time Breath of the Wild was being released, I was already deeper into the series than most were at my age. Ironically, despite Zelda being my favorite media franchise of all time, I ended up getting Breath of the Wild around 7 months after release. I believe I caved and bought Sonic Lost World before Breath of the Wild and put a dent in my Zelda funds. I bought the Wii U version, so I was given a disc rather than a cartridge. I actually really love Breath of the Wild's disc art, depicting the ancient tapestry battle. It's very representative of the game's themes. After receiving the disc and putting it into my Wii U, it gets a little fuzzy. I vaguely seem to remember having issues with booting the game up. If I recall correctly, my Wii U gamepad was either close to breaking or had broken entirely. And some Wii U games required the use of the gamepad, so I may have had to phone a friend and ask them if I could use their gamepad to start the game. This story may be entirely fabricated by my less than explicit memory, but I can still remember the excitement I felt for this game. It was my first time experiencing the release of a new Zelda game in real time, barring maybe Skyward Sword. Although that game released before I was lucid enough to understand what it meant or even have new games on my radar. I cherish my time with Breath of the Wild. No piece of media has ever been able to replicate the feeling of pure freedom and enamorment with the world around you quite as well as this game did for me. I remember one specific night where we were supposed to meet up with some friends and their families, as we usually did each Tuesday night. Unfortunately, the get-together was cancelled, and I, being the grumpy child I was, wasn't all too happy about it. I suppose the strong emotions induced by my disgruntledness served to give the memory more staying power. I was playing Breath of the Wild at the same time, and despite being so upset, when I remember that night, all I can think of is the magical feeling of freedom I experienced when scaling a tall peak in Hyrule. It's a relatively inconsequential memory, but I just can't get it out of my head, notwithstanding the fact that it was, in essence, a distinctly unremarkable moment. I went on to create plenty more memories with the game. My first horse was named Brownie. He had a brown and tan pattern and a mohawk. I remember riding him near Rito Village and falling directly off the edge of a cliff. Brownie unfortunately did not survive the fall, and after his death, multiple Lizalfos appeared out of thin air. Despite the enemies not actually having orchestrated my horse's death, I certainly channeled my anger into wiping them out in an attempt to avenge my fallen steed. I remember having a bit of fun pretending that they were the reason Brownie had died and taking my revenge on the devious reptiles. I also remember discovering Fort Hateno for the first time. Similar to my previous memories, there was really nothing special or outstanding about my discovery, but I suppose it is the prospect of exploring Hyrule with no foreknowledge of the land that elates me when recalling these experiences. I may divert your attention to another heavy-hitting open-world game, Elden Ring, for just a moment, as I believe it'll serve to emphasize what makes Breath of the Wild so unique and special. Elden Ring thrives off of its grandiose displays of spectacle. The wonder you feel upon first discovering the royal capital, Leyndell, is second only to the initial reveal of Hyrule when exiting the Shrine of Resurrection, and even then, that may just be the nostalgia talking. While Elden Ring certainly has a beautiful and atmospheric open world, littered with breathtaking locales and mind-boggling views, its idea of spectacle is far more overt and forthcoming. Breath of the Wild, while also having many profound reveals and moments, fundamentally contrasts Elden Ring's approach to splendor, as its spectacle is often derived from its serenity. Breath of the Wild thrives in understated subtlety. Standing atop a mountain peak as the sun begins to rise, accompanied by nothing more than the sound of wind blowing, provides for far more personal and sentimental moments than I've had in any other video game. Or at least more moments born of my own making, rather than being evoked by a story beat or reveal. This isn't to underplay the game's masterfully constructed main story or its unique mechanics, its sparing yet atmospheric use of music, its intriguing characters and locales, or its deeply emotional cinematography, but rather it is to establish its most important aspect, how its freeform nature allows for the player to easily and enjoyably form a bond between themselves and the game, or in more easily digestible terms, how its freedom lets the player create their own adventures. I believe that to be the most focal and important part of the experience, and it can only be most effectively attained when the player is entirely new to the world they're traversing. This is precisely the feeling I hope Tears of the Kingdom is able to replicate and build upon. For all the crap I've given its marketing campaign in the past, I believe it's shaping up to be a game not only exemplary of that feeling, but a game that can propel that feeling to new heights. Literally. At first, I was somewhat apprehensive to the idea of embracing and fleshing out the more practical and construction-focused mechanics, as I was afraid of Tears of the Kingdom essentially becoming Minecraft. But as more and more of the game came to light, my fears were put at ease. Tears of the Kingdom promises not only to provide a satisfying and enthralling narrative, but also promises to accent their narrative by putting a massive emphasis on the player's imagination, which is just such a natural and beautiful way to evolve Breath of the Wild's initial vision. After being reminded of and understanding what made Breath of the Wild so special, I can genuinely say I'm more excited now for Tears of the Kingdom than I've ever been. The idea that I'll once again be able to experience a game that makes me feel the same way Breath of the Wild did is a very enticing prospect. There's something poetic to me about the immense jump in my life from Breath of the Wild to Tears of the Kingdom. I am an intensely different person in comparison to who I was 6 years ago, especially considering Breath of the Wild was released during the dawn of my adolescence. And now, here I am, closer than ever to passing the line of adulthood. Well, closer than I was before, at the very least. Breath of the Wild means so very much to me, primarily in an emotional sense rather than in any other sense. I could sit and analyze why it makes me feel the way it does, but for now I'd rather just recount the feelings I experienced themselves. I don't want to look at Tears of the Kingdom as just a game. I want to view it as an experience, a successor to the game that provided me with more exploratory adventure than any other game. More than anything, I simply hope to recreate the same type of memories I did when playing the original. Memories I can recall in the future and enjoy how they represent a simpler time. And even if Tears of the Kingdom somehow doesn't manage to live up to those standards, which is very possible, I'll still always have my experiences with Breath of the Wild. And this video will stand as a benign reminder of the adventures I had when I was younger. The flow of time is always cruel. Its speed seems different for each person, but no one can change it. A thing that doesn't change with time is a memory of younger days.